Hey everyone, welcome to the E2 Effective Elders podcast. Visit us at e2elders.org and please share this good word with others.
Hey everybody, welcome back to E2 Connect. This is our weekly podcast that CDF Capital enables us to produce. We're so grateful for our partnership with CDF Capital. And today we welcome Dr. Billy Strother. Billy's a wonderful friend of E2, of mine personally. And Billy is on what we call the bench here at E2, one of our valued coaches to help elders become all the stronger people of God leading the local church. So Billy here is on the faculty at CCCB, Central Christian College of the Bible in Moberly, Missouri. He's the Director of Graduate Studies, and most importantly, he is our brother in Jesus. Billy, welcome. We're so grateful you said yes to today's podcast.
Thank you, my dear friend. I'm honored to be invited to participate. And you and I have been friends for almost 34 years.
Yes.
34 years. My goodness.
Our path crossed when you were on faculty at then Cincinnati Christian Seminary or Bible Seminary back in the day. That was even before it was called CCU. Yeah. And for those who are listening and are watching, Billy was my New Testament professor of preaching in graduate school.
Yes,
I think I was older than you. Well, I'm older than you now.
Yes, I was 29 when they desperately made me a grad professor. I felt like Doogie Howser because I was the youngest person in the classroom and often the dumbest. And I had great people like you in the class. And when I would not know the answer to a student question, I'd say, that's so simple. I think Gary Johnson could answer that. And then I'd learn from you. And I think Rick Russo was in there, David Faust, Mike Shannon. It was ridiculous. So
yeah, it's
been a joy. It's been a joy.
Well, everybody, we are on this journey in these 7 weeks called Hope for the Holidays. And every member of our bench, these 7 people are speaking about what has given to them hope at this time of year. And Dr. Billy, I know that as a professor of preaching, one of your favorite models or structures of a sermon is narrative hybrid. You love to tell a story, a narrative, and then from that, you bring, scriptural truth to bear that brings us strength and hope for life from the living, enduring Word of God. So I just invite you to tell us some story about hope for the holiday that you personally have found. Would you do that, please?
Yes, thank you. I grew up, like many who are watching this podcast, dirt poor in rural Indiana is where I was raised. My parents were incredible, loving people, and they wanted to have a family. They didn't have much of a family growing up or an education, so they decided to have children, and they had 5 of us. And the first 4 were barely separated a year apart. It was more like having gerbils, I think, just one right after the other. and then a little bonus baby that came along later. So I have 2 brothers, 2 sisters. And our upbringing was rural and small town. And you know how people raise free-range chickens. My parents raised free-range children. So there weren't any rules or restrictions. We were just out there. We'd be gone. And the advantage was everybody in that little small town knew everybody. The danger for children like me was if you did something wrong, every mother in the community was allowed to smack you. That was when it was corporal punishment as well. So we were just always doing our own thing. And again, we were dirt poor. We hunted, fished, and trapped literally for food. But I think we were so poor, even the squirrels felt sorry for us. And sometimes they just come out of the woods and surrender themselves with their little paws up so we can eat. But in that family, with my mom and dad, they tried to make every Thanksgiving and every Christmas special. So dad would take an extra job for 3 months before Thanksgiving and Christmas. Mom would go to work. And so we didn't have much, but we just always had these marvelous Christmases because it was so important to mom and dad, and nothing but good memories. And the gifts were never amazing, but they were outstandingly given with love. So my view of the holidays growing up was wonderful. But then I came upon a season recently that made the holidays very difficult. In December of 2018, I was diagnosed with colon cancer and was about to undergo surgery 2 weeks before Christmas. And I was literally sitting in the oncologist's office, and I got a phone call that my mother died of a cerebral hemorrhage. What made that so hard was I was not only her son, but I had been her pastor. And mom and dad had been members of my church for a long time. And being the first Christian in my family, like others, I became the pastor of the whole family. And she died just 2 weeks before Christmas. And had the honor of preaching her funeral. Lovely, godly, Christian woman. She thanked Jesus for everything. I would shovel her snow off her driveway, and she'd thank Jesus, and I'd say, well, Mom, I did it. I didn't see Jesus with no shovel, but she was a beautiful spirit. And when she passed, then I had to go home and then have colon cancer surgery 3 days before Christmas. So it was a tough season.
Yeah.
Then the next year, on Thanksgiving Day, 2019, I'm sitting on a couch at my son's home with the grandchildren. And Thanksgiving morning, about 10 o'clock, I got a phone call that my brother, who is a year younger, was found deceased that morning. The tragedy of it is we both went in the Army about the same time as late teens, and he started drinking and never stopped and literally destroyed his body. And so alienated every single member of his family, his children, everyone, because of that terrible family disease. Everyone loved him. When he was sober, he was amazing, but he'd so alienated that he had actually passed away 2 weeks before. And nobody knew it until the neighbor went over to bring some Thanksgiving food. That was devastating to hear before sitting down and playing with your grandchildren. And so we got through his loss. And 2 weeks later, in December of 19, just before Christmas, my sister, who's a year older, died. And so the last 3 years have been a series of holiday losses. And all of us kids were always really close. But the most terrible, wonderful Thanksgiving ever was the one I spent 8 years ago. It's the hardest one of all. It was the most difficult. My little brother, who was 45 years old at the time, had a long history of diabetes. He was a father of 2 teens. He was divorced, but a sweet, sweet man. And he was living with my mother for about 10 years. They were best friends. And so he called me on a Saturday before Thanksgiving and said, can you come up here from Atlanta and spend some time with me? I said, what's going on? And he said, well, I've made some decisions about my health care. A couple months earlier, he had been on dialysis for 3 years and finally got on the kidney donor list. And 2 days after that, he suffered a massive stroke. And the whole left side of his body was paralyzed in the nursing home, 3 days a week dialysis. So he asked me to come up, and I said, why? And he said, I've decided to do no more dialysis. And I would just like to spend the last days of my life with you.
Wow.
So I got there the next day on Sunday, and he said goodbye to his children, and he told my mother and sister, then by his bedside, told them goodbye. He said he just wanted to spend his last days in that hospital intensive care unit with me. And he asked me if I would hold him when the end came. And so that was on Sunday, and we didn't get into any real heavy discussions. He was an avid Cubs fan and a sports card and memorabilia collector, a professional at it. And so we'd have a little conversation about baseball or sports cards. And then he saw I had an iPad. It was my first iPad. He says, "Hey, Billy, you got any music on there?" I said, "Oh, yeah. I got 2,000 songs." And he said, I said, "What do you want to hear?" He said, "Simon and Garfunkel." I hate Simon and Garfunkel. Just hate Simon. And so I looked on there. I had one song, Bridge Over Troubled Water. And I had to hear it all week long about 200 times. But it brought some level of comfort to him. And we'd be quiet for 2 hours as I'm sitting there, and then he'd say something. And then it came time where he was getting weaker and weaker. They had to put him on a respirator, and I'm sitting there with him. And then he had communicated that he was done with this and was ready to go. And when they removed, really unplugged him from the respirator, removed the breathing apparatus, I held him, but oh my gosh, he didn't pass away. That was the day before Thanksgiving. Somehow he didn't pass away, and he became fully conscious. Body continued to deteriorate. And I got 3 more days with him.
Wow.
He would talk once in a while, every couple hours. And then finally, he was a Christian man. He loved the Lord. But he looked up at me and he said, "Gary, Billy, do you think God has forgotten me?" This was the day before Thanksgiving. "Do you think God has forgotten?" And I looked down on his broken body, his paralysis, his diminished capacity. And I think that may have been the first time where my heart was so broken by a pastoral question that I'm looking, and my first impulse is, in my heart, gosh, it sure looks like he might have forgotten you. I didn't say it. I'm his brother, confidant, but I'm also his pastor.
Right.
And I'm a theologian with no immediate answer. So I just sat there quiet. I didn't say a word. And then I remembered the story. Sevilla Martin in 1905 was visiting a bedridden friend. She'd been bedridden for 20 years, and her husband was in a wheelchair, went to work every day. Imagine 1905 in New York. And Sevilla and her husband were visiting, but the Doolittles, friends, couple, they just had this cheeriness and hopefulness, bright hopefulness, they called it. And finally, the husband asked Mrs. Doolittle, said, "How can you be so hopeful and cheery? You're bedridden. Your husband's going back and forth in a wheelchair." And she said these words. She said, "His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me." So those words came to me.
Wow.
And my answer to my little brother was, I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. And I said, "Brad, he's got his arms open, bro. And I'll be here as long as you're here. But he is near, and he cares." And as Psalm 34:18 says,
yes,
"The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed." And we hung on to those words together, of the song and of the psalm. And then a couple days later, on the day after Thanksgiving, is when he breathed his last. But he felt comforted and assured and hopeful last 48 hours of his life. And
wow.
And that moment now has carried me through the other deaths of siblings and my mother and my own cancer. I look at his faith in that moment to just hear the words of the psalm and then hear the words of Psalm 34:18. And I look at my own life now when I have a struggle, especially around the holidays, and I go, you know what? I don't have a struggle. I have inconvenience. And when I feel brokenhearted or I feel crushed, I know the Lord is near. I know he's watching me and he will rescue. And I'm hoping that every single person this holidays that suffered loss or heartbreak or has problems or their spouse said, you know, I want a divorce, kid broke their heart. I hope they can remember that through it all, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed.
Powerful. What a great story. Excellent narrative. And you brought up many things to indicate how we can find hope for the holidays. For example, not only when you mentioned Psalm 34:18 and the lyrics of that life-giving hymn of ages past, but when you were telling that, and you said in your own brokenness, you remember Brad. And, that reminds me of Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, you and I, you knew Brad, and we've all been surrounded by people who faced death head on, and they held on to Jesus Christ. Revelation chapter 3, verse 10, be faithful to the point of death, and I'll give you the crown of life. Never once did Jesus call us to be successful. He called us to be faithful. And Brad was you pointed him in those moments to the Lord, and he held on to the Lord. And now that moment inspires you.
I think it became so important because I had an answer in his 48 hours. Lester is like, he lived that answer. He gave me a role model to follow, how to have hope during the worst of times.
Absolutely. And isn't that true about God? God, Malachi chapter 3, verse 6, I, the Lord, do not change. So Brad found Emmanuel, God with me.
Yes.
And your cancer in 2018, 3 days before Christmas, the death of your mom. I, the Lord, do not change. He's with you. Noah in chapter 8 of Genesis, verse 1. I love those opening words. And God remembered Noah.
Yeah.
And God doesn't change like shifting shadows, we read in the book of James. So God's eye is on the sparrow, day to day, century to century, until Jesus comes back. And then our eye is going to be on God. We're going to see him face to face in all of his glory.
I always have loved Matthew 11:28 through 30. That the holidays can be the best of times and worst of times. And worst of all, I think, is the first week of January when the credit card bills come in from Christmas. But I always try to remember through the holidays, Matthew 11:28, come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I'm going to give you what? Rest. And so my prayer is that persons who feel they have no hope, maybe they'll hear this video and say, if they don't have a Brad in their life, who I call the best theologian who ever taught me anything. I hope that they can be inspired by his story or find a Brad in their own life who's living courageously and joyfully in the worst of circumstances for Christ.
Yeah, for Christ. Absolutely. And that's a good word for all of us to end on. So, Billy, thank you for taking time to be so transparent, so authentic in telling your story personally and how you have found hope for the holidays. And it's all in our living hope, Jesus Christ.
Well, just a footnote. There were 5 of us. Now there's just me and my little sister, who's 3 years younger. We've got a lottery going on which one of us goes first because our gene pool's a cesspool, so we're not anticipating a long retirement.
Yeah, that's too good. I'm going to recommend that if anybody on a late night show loses their job as a stand-up comedian, that people get a hold of you. So,
oh my gosh! Well, the nice part is you don't even have to stretch the truth. I love you, my friend. I wish you a hopeful and joyous Thanksgiving, as well as to anybody who listens to this podcast.
Absolutely,
a hopeful and joyous Christmas and Thanksgiving.
Thanks, buddy. And I'm so grateful for the day that the Lord Jesus made our paths to cross. So,
me too.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
God bless you, brother. Bye.